Hey everybody, welcome to this week's edition of WeAreSC's Inside the Trojans Huddle. We are a couple of days after the Michigan loss. We'll probably talk about that a little bit today. And other than that, hope everybody's doing well. We have the usual crew fresh back from the state of Michigan. Eric McKinney, Mark Hulkin, and me, your temporary host, Chris Arledge. Um, Guys, let's just jump right into it. There's no reason to beat around the bush. Let's start with the big picture. What's your big picture assessment of this Michigan game? Eric, start us off.
So, big picture is at the beginning of the year, if you had said first three games, you go 2-1 with a 3-point loss at Michigan, I think a lot of people would have taken it. So where you are in the rankings right now, which again by the end of the year won't matter, that's going to play out. But 13 in the AP poll, 2-1, you've shown that you can play defensively with I know Michigan's offense is a 1930s grainy black and white offense. But physically, you can match up with everybody on the schedule. And I think we've got confidence in the back end that they can play against the pass too, with what we've seen against LSU and in some of these games. I think coming out of that Michigan game, you feel good about kind of the heart and the makeup of this team to play with everybody on their schedule, which is what we said before the Michigan game. So I don't think that changed that much. The 3 alarm offensive line fire that was coming out of the LSU game is now a solid 4.8, pushing to 5, maybe at 5 after the Michigan game. I think that you can say that's the best defensive line they're going to play the rest of the year. Penn State is going to bring some edge rushers. Nebraska has a defense that can kind of confuse, and that Tony White system is going to be difficult. Notre Dame has some big guys at the end of the season. I don't think any of them have that combination that Michigan has, and playing at that stadium in that environment that will test USC's offensive line like that. But that was bad. I mean, that was devastating to the team, to the operation, to everything involved with that game, that performance. And until you see it sort of fixed, Wisconsin feels like a mini Michigan. Like nothing is as good as what Michigan will bring on the line, but it's going to be the same test-ish up there. And this is the start of 7 games in a row without a bye against up and down Big Ten teams. So I think coming out of it, you think, all right, this team is not going to fall apart, and it's not going to flatline the way we've seen some USC teams in the past do it. The defense is going to keep them in every game, no matter how horrible the offense may start. And they've got to find some real answers on the offensive line. And don't ask me a follow up on that because I don't know where you're going to find them. They took 10 offensive linemen to the game. They played 7 of them. One of the ones that didn't play was a true freshman. One of the ones that didn't play was a walk on. So there are not bodies. You can't go to a ton of different bodies there. So yeah, the concern there is very real. The appreciation for the way this team plays and the potential, if the offensive line can, like you said, going into that game, get a draw in these games, it does feel nice for all the chaos offensively. It feels nice to be able to say that defense is going to go on the field and play, and any breakdown is going to be surprising rather than expected. So I think there's some positive feelings about this USC team coming out of just a disappointing game. That was not a bad loss. It was a disappointing sort of missed opportunity game, I think, for USC.
Mark, fire away.
I, we were talking right before we started. This loss, it didn't leave me feeling hurt, emotional. My heart's broken. I was more mad. I was more disappointed. Big picture, this team is going to be just fine. Okay, it's that whole so close but yet so far away. You play such great defense throughout 57 minutes of a 60-minute game, but then you have 3 explosive plays that you gave up. You take away those 157 yards of explosive plays on 3 different runs, we're probably having a different conversation right now. But yeah, Eric brought it up. The offensive line, uh-oh, what are you going to do? If you don't have the personnel, maybe we do, maybe we don't, you definitely have the opportunity to game plan for your personnel. And if they're showing weaknesses against a really strong, aggressive defensive line, maybe we start talking about some different types of in-game adjustments. But yeah, to the game as itself, big picture, USC, the fans, they don't have anything to be, upset about as far as, wanting to hide your head in the sand and pretend like everything's bad. That's not the case. It's again, this team is close, but and I have to remind myself this all the time. We're coming off a different defense that was around. They're still putting in Danton Lynn's defense. And when you can go up to Michigan and perform as well as you did, save for 3 plays, that's a good sign. But yeah, offensively, that was probably the most frustrating part of this game for me, big picture wise. Is Lincoln Riley ready to take that next step? Because it seems like he's kind of right in the middle right now. He's not sure, do I force the run? Do I force the pass? Where am I right now? What is the identity going to be? And how is it going to work in relation with the defense that's really, really coming along? So big picture, I think the team's going to be fine. I think the most disappointing part was you had 2 weeks to prepare for this, and you didn't come out with the result you wanted. And you were in a position to win despite everything that went against the team, from the officiating, the poor offensive line play, the questionable play calling on offense. This team was in a position to win this game when it seemed like everything was stacked against them. So yeah, that's my big picture analysis as of right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's disappointing to give a game away, and they gave this one away. They haven't given the season away because everything that they had a chance to accomplish coming into the Michigan game is still available to them. And there were some bright spots. Being down 14-0 early against that team in that building with an offensive line that has given you every indication that it has no chance of blocking the guys in front of them, and then scrapping and finding a way not only to get back into the game, but actually to have control of it, have it completely locked up and in your hand, it's over. Because that's where it was. When they got the ball back up late in the game, you're really in a position where a single first down probably wins it. Yeah, look, even not getting a first down, if you run down the clock, might win it. I remember watching the game. I told my dad, this is where you really wish you had a consistent running attack, because you win the game, right? If you can run the ball here, you win the game. And part of the problem with having an offensive line that struggles the way USC's does is that when you find yourself in a position where a first down wins the game, you can't just run it off tackle 3 times and pick it up. And USC's had a lot of teams in its history that do just that, right? Doesn't matter, it's coming, they'll run it 3 times, they'll win the game. They don't have that right now, and that's going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem against good teams. When you're playing a good team, especially on the road, games tend to be decided by mistakes. And USC made some doozies. The play calling mistakes, I think, that Lincoln Riley made, especially on that last possession we just talked about, but not just there. I mean, he admitted that he screwed that one up. I think he probably could have taken his admission a little more broadly. It was not a well-called game of Lincoln Riley. I'm not going to trash Lincoln Riley as an offensive coordinator. His track record is such that I would look foolish if I said it, but he didn't help his offense very much in that game, and he needed to. The pick six was devastating. Yes, USC came back, they got the ball, they scored again. But look, Michigan's in a cover two. You're throwing to the boundary side where you have maybe the best corner in the country sitting in the flats. You cannot take that snap, immediately look at Zachariah Branch going at him. You can't do it. You can't. Miller Moss is a good quarterback. He is a tough dude and a great leader of that team. I'm not going to rip Miller Moss. That was a gigantic mistake. Miller knows that. A gigantic mistake. And when you hold a team to 9 yards in a half, and then you give up a 63-yard run to essentially lose the game, that's going to sting a little bit. So look, we were all wrong about some things. We all picked USC to win. Michigan scored 20 points. We weren't all that far off when it came to how much Michigan would put on the board. We all thought that Michigan would have a very difficult time throwing the ball. We weren't wrong about that. I was wrong when I thought USC's offensive line would be able to fight those guys to a draw. That was not a draw. That was just a prison beatdown. There was like a whole gang of prisoners, and the new guy comes in and they beat on him for 60 minutes. That's what that was. It was ugly. The fact that they came back and took the lead in that game under those circumstances is actually a little bit remarkable. But last point I'll make, and then I know Mark wants to say something. We'll talk about some of the defensive stuff in a minute. There's one play that I think this team should take to heart, and that was that Woody Marks strip. Because there are a few things about that play. I went and watched it again. I had forgotten that Woody Marks was supposed to be helping the right tackle block Stewart. He did not help him block Stewart. You cannot, if you're the running back in that situation, allow the guy to run right outside of you. That's the whole reason you're there. Okay? That was a terrible effort by him. But after that ball's on the ground, if you watch the replay, you have 3 USC offensive linemen standing there looking at the ball, assuming that the play is dead and not trying to jump on it. And then you have one running back who had screwed up the play, who decided that he was going to put in a really remarkable effort to go and do something. And if USC wins that game, that play gets immortalized as the play that wins it for them. Discipline and focus matter. Technique matters. But you know what? Sometimes effort just matters. And this is a USC team that is not talented enough to get to the playoff just on their size and speed and skill. This is a USC team that makes it to the playoff, if they do, because they have guys giving tremendous effort for 60 minutes. And that was a great effort play by Woody Marks, who's turned out to be a pretty good player. I think we all thought he would be. Okay, I've been talking too long. Let's do this. Let's go to topic number 2, which is related to what we've been talking about. How does the offensive line bounce back from that performance? And maybe more importantly, long term, does USC have an O-line problem? I mean, you see a lot of the other pieces coming together. You see a secondary that's been rebuilt. You see a defensive line that's not uber talented, but they play hard. They're aggressive. They're tough. You see skill position guys on the field that you feel really good about. Do we have an O-line problem that's going to plague us for the next couple of years? I'm a little bit worried about this. What do you think? Mark, why don't you jump in? Eric already said we can't ask any follow-up questions on the O-line to him, so I'm going to ask you.
So to your last point, you're talking about for the next couple of years. Let's remind ourselves, this is a young offensive line. So over the next couple of years, they're going to improve. They have to improve. They have to be better. But I think they learned a hard lesson in the big conference. Apparently, you are allowed to hold as an offensive lineman if you play for Michigan. You're allowed to hold all game long. That winning score.
And you can face mask if you want.
You can face mask too if you play defense. But when it comes to the offensive line, it seemed like they were playing against a defensive line that was much better than they were on the offensive line. Surprise, Michigan has a good defensive line. They've got 2 defensive tackles that are, first, second, third day draft picks. You've got a couple of Russians that are super athletic. And USC has a couple of offensive tackles that were starting that aren't as quick as, a Josiah Stewart or a Derek Moore. It looked like their feet were stuck in peanut butter. They were playing in mud for whatever. They were always off balance. The offensive line could have had some help from the play calling. Like you said, Chris, Miller Moss, one tough son of a bitch. But let's get him outside the pocket on occasion. Let's use Michigan's aggressiveness against them. If they're coming hard every time, you know what? Let's roll the pocket. Let's do more than one trick play. Let's use that aggressiveness against them. And I just don't know if USC put their offensive line in the best position to be successful. That doesn't excuse how poorly they played. I mean, we could highlight, Jonah Monheim getting tossed like a rag doll by Mason Graham. We can highlight, the offensive tackles lunging at air. But again, that comes down to, were these guys ready for this environment? Michigan's defense has played in this type of environment. They played in the national championship game last year. They're used to playing in the big house with 100,000 people watching them. I don't know if USC's offensive line was prepared for what they were facing that day. There were moments where they looked good, but there were too many moments where they looked terrible. And that was the difference. Miller Moss didn't have the chance to allow some of those passing routes to develop. He was constantly looking for the quick, his first look. And I think that played a role. It's going to be interesting to see how the offensive line bounces back at home. It's going to be interesting to see if there's any personnel changes this week, because when they did make that change at halftime, they were better. I won't say, they were great, but they played better. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. Right now, the offensive line and the wide receivers, for me, are the 2 question marks on offense. I didn't think I'd be saying the wide receivers, but we have to throw that in there if we're going to point the offensive line.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. We'll probably talk about that in a bit. Eric, do we have long-term offensive line problems, or was this just a young group playing in a tough spot against really good players, but we're going to be okay? What do you think?
There's a problem now because of what happened 4 or 5 years ago. And I know you love when we talk Clay Helton here, but this line, right? This year's line, the 2024 line, that 2020 recruiting class, the 2021 recruiting class, the fact that Lincoln didn't bring in high school guys in that 22, very short class, the transfer portal they brought in, you go back years, offensive line recruiting leading up to this point is just it's the most disastrous position group, multiple year recruiting effort that I can think of. I think linebacker was an issue years and years ago. There were all kinds of misses there, but offensive line right now was a disaster in that game because of how many 2023 offensive linemen we are talking about in 2024, especially when those 2023 offensive linemen were brought in and the thought was, hey, year 3, this guy's going to be pretty good, right? We get him a little bit of playing time. We get him on the practice field. We develop him. 3rd year, redshirt sophomore that year, redshirt junior for this guy. He's going to be ready to go. The plan should not have ever been, we need these guys right now. We need these guys in 2024. And I think we talked, last year and years before, where it was, boy, if this thing keeps panning out this way, that 2024 group is going to be in trouble because you're going to need to rely on a lot of young guys. So it's a little bit like talking about the Michigan game where, there's a lot of good, there's a lot of bad. So when you talk about the offensive line recruiting, there were so many misses before Lincoln Riley got here. But The transfer portal now allows you to fix it very quickly, and those misses have been just as bad as the other ones. It's 1 year guys that haven't worked. If you could get a handful of Emmanuel Priones to come in, that's great. But it's clear that the idea of, we don't want a guy who's just here for NIL. He's got to fit. That's a very important group to have that mesh well. You understand that now after what happened last year when you brought guys in and it didn't really fit on the field or seemingly off the field, and it was kind of chaos and a disaster there too. So yeah, there are a lot of issues, I think, right now with the offensive line, both what has happened in the past leading up to this year, and then I think maybe with potentially like psyche stuff for the guys having to get thrown in there now, maybe before they're ready, and how that plays out. You hope that they can sort of, memory erase the bad and use the experience and keep progressing and stay on track to what you thought for them when your question it comes into play down the road and next year and all of that. But these are, you worry about a really bad experience early in your career and what that might do. So yeah, it's gotta be fixed, both with high school recruiting, and I think with the transfer portal next year. You're going to need some guys to come in and play right away. And if that's a departure from, again, we don't want an NIL first guy. We need a guy who's going to fit. We don't, that sort of thing. Boy, maybe that's a spot where you roll the dice again, but it's hard to say to do that when last year's, just did not work out very well. And that was kind of an anchor for the offense at times too. So I don't know if because you have that 2023 group, and I think the young guys now that we haven't seen at all, I think those guys are going to be good too. So long term, I don't know if it's a problem, but boy, it feels maybe tough to tread water with what you're sitting there with right now, again, based on going against a very good defensive line.
Yeah, there are a lot of fans that are very unhappy with Josh Henson right now. Now, I have on this show and in articles in the past called out coaches who simply weren't getting it done. I'm not doing that with Josh Henson right now. I think it's too early to do that. But everything that you said, Eric, is something that these coaches have known for the last 2 years, right? They knew that there was nothing from 2020, that there was nothing from 2021, that in that very short recruiting season in 2022 that they didn't build an offensive line class. They've known that for years. After last year, everybody was looking at the roster saying, okay, so I guess we're going with a redshirt freshman left tackle and Mason Murphy, who we don't trust at right tackle. Everybody expected that the coaches would go out and find an offensive tackle in the transfer portal, maybe two, and they didn't. So while I'm not saying that he has failed, I am saying that I'm a little bit concerned with what's happened, because in year 3 of Lincoln Riley's tenure, he should have an offensive line that can compete. Maybe not a group that goes out and dominates one of the best defensive lines in the country. I'm not saying that. But he should have a group of guys that could compete. And instead, we threw 4 redshirt freshmen out there that played a ton, and especially on the outside, really got embarrassed. And they got embarrassed. There's no doubt about it. I mean, you watch the replays, it's just embarrassing. There were times when they didn't touch a guy, right? I mean, just didn't touch him. And Miller Moss is getting clobbered. That should not be happening. That is a Josh Henson and Lincoln Riley screw up. Let's call it for what it is. It is. And maybe you blame NIL for that, fine. But I mean, I don't know that head coaches that make $12 million a year get to say, well, it's my 3rd year, but NIL wasn't strong, so we're just going to throw out guys who can't block anybody. That's not okay. nor am I willing to say, I'm just going to trust the coaches, because I know that Lincoln Riley doesn't have a great track record at holding his staff accountable for their failures. He doesn't. We all know this. Don't need to go into the Grinch. We're going to talk about the Grinch. He's coming up in a bit. We don't need to talk about that. I'm not willing to say, oh, I'm going to trust him. I don't trust him to do that. I don't trust him to look at his staff and say, this guy's not performing, he's got to go, because in that past he hasn't done it. So I don't know. I feel pretty good about last year's recruiting class. I feel pretty good about the class that that they brought in this year. I think that these are guys who are going to be good players, but these weren't guys who were ready to go out and play this earlier in their career against a team like that. They just weren't, and not very many guys are. I mean, there are some Winston Justices out there. There's some Tony Basellis that by their second year are really, really good. But that's not who these guys are. And I think we knew that's not who these guys were when they were recruited, right? We look at them and say, these are big guys. They have some athletic ability. These guys are going to need to be developed. In 3 years, I think we'll have a pretty good group. That's what everybody looked at the group and said. So it's a problem. And look, USC is going to be okay most weeks because they're going to play pretty good defense. They will find a way to, when they're not playing against the best defensive line in the country, they'll find a way to protect Miller Moss enough. They'll find a way to run the ball enough. The skill positions are solid. USC should still be heavy favorites in all but 2 of their remaining games, right? They should be. They should win those. I'm not saying they will. Everybody can get upset. But they should win all of those games. And that means that they're going to have to find a way to handle Penn State and Notre Dame up front, and those will be challenges. So I'm worried. I think everybody is worried right now. And as Eric said, it's not a situation where you say, well, you know, these guys are beat up, but we'll get them back in a week or two. And I mean, those are the guys they've got. They're going to have to grow up in a hurry. And Josh Henson's going to have to work some magic. We'll see if he's capable of that. Mark, you wanted to say something, and I kept talking for far too long.
Well, you know, how much blame can we really put at the feet of Lincoln Riley and Josh Henson for? And Eric was touching on this, on the room, the numbers, the experience. When he took over in 2022, you're coming off, let's just call it, a really bad team.
Horrible. Horrible.
Sure. You don't have all those recruiting prospects out there saying, whoa, wow, now's my time. I'm jumping on board. We've talked about it on the defensive side of the ball. Same thing applies to the offense. Proof of concept. Show me, and I'll come on board. And USC they were in the position, they're still in a position now where, yeah, NIL is playing a role with this. You knew you had holes at the most important positions on your offensive line, offensive tackle. You got to go get them when you have freshmen and redshirt freshmen on your roster. You need to go get those guys who are going to be ready to play. So we're not force feeding guys from the 2023 class into a position where, all right, guess what? You're in the big house now. And look at those guys across from you. Are you ready? Yeah, coach, I'm ready. Go prove it. We saw they weren't ready. And again, how much coaching you can put onto these guys with limited experience in a game, that's the biggest difference. It's not that they're.
I do not blame the coaching staff for not having redshirt freshmen ready to play in the big house in a sold-out game, one of the 2 big games of the week against the best defensive line in college football. I don't hold them accountable for that. I do hold them accountable for having to put those guys on the field in year 3, and that is a problem. And while it's true that they didn't have a proof of concept, but USC had been in the top 10 offensively both of Riley's first 2 years, and every other year Riley coaches. They had a proof of concept there. And when you compare the excitement that Coach Henney and the defensive staff were able to generate with defensive recruits without having any proof of concept, and compare that to what seems to be a relative lack of enthusiasm with elite offensive line recruits, I'm going to have to ask whether or not we need a better recruiter in that position. I
How
don't
many-
know if we do, but
how
I'm
many-
wondering.
How many times did Caleb Williams save the offensive line's butt by making them look better than maybe they were?
Last year, a bunch. The year
Exactly.
before, a
And
little
the
bit
Heisman
less.
year-
That was a pretty good group.
Yeah, and the Heisman year, a little bit less. So again, you don't have a super mobile, athletic quarterback in Miller Moss behind you. You've got a really young, inexperienced offensive line now. It's just like it was the perfect storm at the perfect place not to want to be rained on. And that's what
But I think
happened.
that's what Chris is saying is like when Lincoln Riley takes over, the expectation at no position group on the roster, even defensively, was that you would be better in 2022 than you were in 2023 and then better in 2023. Like you never thought anywhere you'd get worse year over year with Lincoln Riley. You thought every position's going up. They're going to recruit better, especially on offense. Especially, I mean, again, it's one of those things where whenever anybody talks about Lincoln Riley, from other programs, other coaches, one of the first things they say about him is, "Oh, you think he only throws the ball? His run game is great. It's built off the run game. It's built off the run game." And you thought when he came in, it would be, let's get this run game going. Let's go. Let's get an offensive lineman here. Let's start building it. And it was like kicking the can down the road a little bit early on, it felt, and without being able to build that right away, you're starting to see it was like a 1 or 2 year gap. Again, I think the 2023 guys are going to be okay to play next year. But because you didn't load up with young guys right away when you got in, you kind of skipped a year. And maybe having all those vets back in 2022 and being able to rely on that group, maybe that plays into it a little bit. But it feels like you've missed a year in sort of building that depth behind and needing to go to the portal. And when you miss a year in the portal, you create this sort of vacuum right here.
Did I miss a year? Because if I remember correctly, he took over the program the end of 2022, late December, right? How much time did he have?
Late November, but yes.
I apologize. Late November. How much time did they really have to get guys interested in coming to the program? I mean, you have this.
None.
But
None
you don't
there.
look. No. In you don't. With the transfer portal, when you're making the money he's making and you're in a program at USC, Lincoln Riley did not tell us in 4 years we're going to be good because it's going to take us 4 years to build up this roster. He didn't say it. He didn't believe it. Nobody would accept it. Lincoln Riley and Josh Henson have screwed up the offensive line because they have not found the pieces they need to. It's year 3, man. It's year 3. You have the transfer
You've only
portal.
had 2 recruiting classes that you
I
can.
don't care.
Yes,
you have to go into the
just agreed
portal.
with me a second ago. They didn't have the opportunity to recruit, but they should have had the guys. And because he's making $12 million a year,
transfer portal. That's what you have to do. You have to do it. They did it defensively. They rebuilt the defense.
Why didn't they get the transfer portal guys?
The guys last year?
Why didn't they get them this past offseason?
You tell me. That's their job. I'm not there. I'm not the lead recruiter for this program.
You're the super genius right now, Chris. Why didn't they get them?
I'm speculating because I'm not a part of those recruitment efforts.
Okay.
But I'll tell you why I think they got them. Because Josh Henson is not the recruiter that the defensive staff is. Okay. That's why they didn't get him.
NIL takes care of that.
Well, okay. I don't know. I mean, here's the thing. They bring in guys on the defensive side.
And USC lost guys on the defensive side of the ball to NIL. Why doesn't that same logic apply on the offensive line at the most important position?
Because the defense is playing really, really, really well right now.
Right, but they missed out on guys before they found that that gem of Gavin Meyer. How many defensive tackles that looked the other way and didn't come to USC because they weren't?
That's exactly right. The defensive staff said that guy that doesn't even play all the time at Wyoming, I think we can plug him in and get some production out of him.
They needed offensive tackles. Why didn't they pay?
Well, they should have paid.
That's my question.
Or they should have found an offensive Gavin Meyer who could compete. Whose fault is this? You don't get to say that in year 3 we can't even be competitive. That's on them. It's
They've been
on
competitive.
them.
They've been competitive. They're not at the Michigan
You were
defense.
there.
They're
You
not
were
at the
there
defensive-
Saturday,
they're not at
Mark.
the
That
Michigan
wasn't
defense-
competitive.
They're not at the Michigan defensive line competitive yet. No. Are they competitive right now to win? Absolutely.
Will they be competitive against Wisconsin? I suspect
Let's find
they
out in
will
a
be.
few days.
That's not USC, and we both know that.
We'll find out in a few days. Well,
But the reality is they knew they needed guys.
yes.
They knew they
Nobody
needed them,
disagrees
and they
with that.
did not get them.
Nobody disagrees with that.
Okay. So I'm
Okay.
holding them accountable for not doing what they needed to do. That's all. I'm not saying Josh Henson
I'm
needs
just
to be
wondering if you're
fired.
holding it to a standard that they weren't able to do it. When
They
you take
failed. That's right. They were not able to do it. And what I'm saying is,
all things considered is what I'm talking about.
and what I'm saying is, you're now in the third year, which should be the third straight year USC goes to the playoff. If Lincoln Riley would have pulled some offensive line out of the transfer portal and gotten rid of Alex Grinch, I'm just saying there are some, and these are
My
not
aunt
small
had a
things.
third leg. She's my uncle. We don't get to play the what if game.
Well, we do.
have to
That's
find
what
out-
we do. This is a show of playing what if.
we have
That's
to
all
also-
we do.
we also have to answer why didn't it happen. Some of that comes into consideration. That's all I'm saying.
Well, all right. So maybe they have some good excuses. But here's the thing. They better figure it out.
Yes.
Because if that offensive line looks like that against Penn State and Notre Dame, you're going to look at this season and say, if they simply would have found a few guys, a couple of guys that could compete with the better teams, this team again would have been in the playoff. And that's a problem. Look, I'm giving him credit for all the things he's done well. He's an incredible quarterbacks coach. He hired an amazing defensive staff. They went out and turned around the worst defense I've ever seen immediately. I'm giving him credit for those things. But let's also be honest. He screwed up when he went into this season with that group on the offensive line. He did.
Trust me, I've torn to Coach Lincoln Riley's my past 2 shows on Locked on USC. He's not getting any quarter from me. But I think when we're talking about the recruiting aspect, having guys ready, the transfer portal, the NIL, we have to take it all into consideration, especially when we're talking about the offensive line. That is a position where, like we talked about since the top of the show, you need guys in the system for 2 to 3 years to develop. They have not had the best opportunity to do that. For whatever the reasons are, all things considered, that's where we're at right now. That's just the fact.
That is where we are. Yeah, and look, we'll see. I mean, Josh Henson has an opportunity to develop the guys he has, bring in some more guys, and build an offensive line. But you can't. It's hard to win against good teams. You can't block anybody.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think we all agree with that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think the
By way,
other thing too, again,
yeah,
the problem is that you're comparing it to the defense, right? When you look at the offense, you can look at the USC defense. How many guys on this USC defense have been at USC before Lincoln Riley got there? Is Jalen Smith the only guy?
Rajon Davis.
Like
Solo.
starting guys compete,
Yeah.
like contributing heavily to the defense. This entire thing outside of Jalen, who again has been unbelievable in the 2 games that he has played. Unbelievable this year.
The
That
most
every
improved
single one of
player in the
those-
program, right? The most improved player in the program.
I think
He's been
Eric Jenkins might
fantastic.
have his hand up on that one too.
Yeah. Both those guys have been phenomenal. But that's the thing, right? Everybody just about on that side is contributing. All the contributors have landed at USC since Lincoln Riley was hired. Unless I'm totally blanking on somebody. I mean, Solo plays up in the front too, but all the big names. And I think that's the difference, is that on the offensive line, it's similar. I mean, Jonah in the middle, which tangent here. What if Jonah decided not to come back and they don't have him in the middle this year? But that's the thing, is that like a lot of those other guys contributing, obviously Mason Murphy is not in there too. They've also been added, and that is a position where you need more time to develop and all of that. But that's the issue, is that you can juxtapose those two things so well, and the 1 year turnaround from the defense at every level has been unbelievable. And it's a bottom line thing, right? You're the coach, you have to put this out on the field. If the gap, Georgia, Alabama, whatever the opponent, if the gap is that big, it shows, right? If there are plays where you almost would have been better not having a guy out there, put 8 wide receivers out there and just kind of throw it up in the air to him. I mean, that's what stands out about that one. They're going to play better against Wisconsin. They're going to play better against a lot of these other teams. But you thought they'd be more ready. I think that's it. I think you thought they'd be more ready against Michigan, and the gap wouldn't be to the point where you go, "Oh my gosh, these guys can't play with these guys at all." And whatever it was, atmosphere or a down day, injury, whatever that kind of thing is, that gap was immense in that game. So yeah, a chance to go forward, chance to play better. You're going to develop as the season goes along. You're 3 games in, and so it'll be interesting to watch. But yeah, when you look at that team lining up and you say, who are our offensive linemen that we can count on? 3 years in, the number of those guys that you're counting on your finger is maybe not as high as you thought it could be.
So let's talk about the defense. How do we rate this defensive performance? Because I think you can look at it a couple different ways. I mean, on one hand, the defense has shown that they are disciplined in a way they weren't last year. They tackle dramatically better than they did last year. And they're tough. They're a tough group, right? They'll get in and mix it up. That I think is a given. On one hand, they completely shut down Michigan for the bulk of that football game. On the other hand, Michigan had an offense that didn't know how to throw a forward pass, so probably you should have. And they had the game won and found a way to give it away at the end. So, a couple different ways we can look at the defensive performance. Maybe both are true. How do we want to rate this defensive performance? Eric, start us off.
This feels like going through like a school semester, and you do really, really well. You take an A into the final, and then you sleep through the alarm and you don't take it, and you get a 0, and you end up with like a B- in the class. Like that's how this is. Every single positive thing you talk about with the defense, those 3 plays just hang over you. And I'm okay, and I know this isn't the exact question. I'm okay shifting a lot of that to the offense. If you have to tell your defense, oh, by the way, you can't make any mistakes. Can't make any mistakes. Can't give up anything all game long. That's a tough thing to do. Now, the other side is those weren't just giving up anything, right? That's not a 25-yard run where you bring the guy down and you keep the drive going. Those were just monumental individual, or if a couple guys, second level, third level, probably first level. We don't know every single kind of call and what was going on in there. The mistakes are massive. When Denton talks about a 10-yard run being an explosive run, I mean, those things were just gargantuan in that game. So yeah, right. Those are not expected anymore. They're not expected, and they're shocking when they happen. And I'm okay being in that position. I kind of wish that Lincoln Riley maybe had more faith in that. Maybe that changes that second to last play, that drive, and you take Michigan's timeout, so you kill more clock or whatever you do there, and that changes the end of the game. But I've got still a ton of faith in this defense when it goes out there. I think they're going to make a play. I think they're going to make a play every time. I did not think that they would stop a single drive for many games last season. I assumed if there was a kickoff or a punt and the other team got the ball, this is 7 points unless a ball gets tipped in the air and somehow there's an interception. But they were never going to stop a 3rd and short. They were never going to do anything like that. Now 3rd and 2, yeah, let's try it. I mean, I know Michigan went 3 for 3 on 4th downs, and there's stuff in there that you want to fix, but Whatever, that's fine. I'll send that defense out against anybody.
Hey, I'll tell you, and it's not just last year.
2 for
The
3.
last 3 years, that was the worst 3 year. I can't imagine a worse 3 year stretch unless it's in the Ukraine and it's the first 3 years of the Second World War. I mean, it was unbelievably bad. It was so bad that I've actually forgotten just how mediocre Clay Helton's defenses were for much of his tenure, because the last 3 years. So not only have they turned that around at least a little bit, but they've played LSU and Michigan in their first 3 games, and they've given up 40 points in 3 games. Holy smokes. That's how much they would give up to Cal in a half last year. Mark, what do you think about that defensive performance?
I loved it all except for 3 plays. I mean, that's what it comes down. And here's the thing, Eric brought up the stat, Michigan was 3 for 3 on 4th down. Actually, had Lincoln Riley challenged the first 4th down conversion?
He did not come close.
Thank you very much.
Did not come close.
That being challenged. All right, that's a whole nother side point. Anyways, Chris, you brought it up. We knew Michigan could not throw the ball. I mean, I'm watching Alex Orji during warmups, and the ball it was sailing into the stands, into the sidelines. He was missing guys wide open during air routes.
Yeah.
Why did Lincoln Riley, Danton Lynn, and not put 8, 9 guys in the box? Danton Lynn said, hey, it doesn't matter who the quarterback is. We're going to do what we do. When you know Michigan is going to run the ball, and they're going to run the ball, and they're going to keep running it until they pop one of those explosive plays, make them throw the ball. You've got Jalen Smith on one side. You've got Jacoby Covington on the other side. You've got 8 to 10 guys you're going to rotate in with the defensive backs anyways. I'm being a little sarcastic there. I never thought that was going to happen. But you got to put your guys in the best possible position to be successful. And again, 3 plays was the key. That's where they had the breakdown. We can break them down individually, how, we saw a flashback to, one of the defensive backs being dragged downfield, the second one coming over to make the tackle, and he kind of took a bad angle. It was those types of little things that exasperated the guy getting to that second level, or eventually scoring a touchdown or getting down to the 2-3 yard line after you run 63 yards. The defense has night and day. I mean, they have made a significant improvement. It's personnel, it's scheme, it's everything. I am really jazzed about this defense. Go ahead.
Yeah, look, here's the wild thing about it. If the defense, with the exception of a handful of plays, did play extremely well. I think they did sell out to stop the run. I think that's why you had the 3 big runs. You see that all the time on a, 4th and 1 at midfield, and you put everybody at the line of scrimmage. They break through that first level, and it's trouble. And I think that's part of the problem. But here's the thing: if you would have told me USC wins this game if it can stop 1 of 3 plays, and on all those plays, Easton Mascarenas Arnold is going to be unblocked, and Kamari Ramsey with a good angle has a chance to make the tackle. You tell me that before the game, I say those 2 guys, Mascarenas Arnold unblocked and Kamari Ramsey taking a good pursuit angle, those guys, and they only had to do it 1 out of 3 plays, dude, I would have bet any amount of money on that. Any amount of money. Because those guys are really good football players. Now, part of it is we don't necessarily know what the assignments are, right? I mean, on the first of those long runs, well, I know this. Kamari Ramsey took bad angles on all 3. That I know. That is without question. And that guy has been an absolute stud the first 2 weeks, and he's a great football player, and I'm not going to trash him here. He is excellent, and I'm thrilled to death we have him, and he'll come out next week against Wisconsin, and it'll blow everybody up. I know that's going to happen. He took 3 bad angles, and they were costly. Mascarenas Arnold, I don't know entirely. There were a couple of times where I thought he missed his gap, or more likely that he had a different gap, and he wasn't sure where to go, and he didn't actually fill either one of them. I mean, that's essentially what happened on a couple of those plays. And in fairness, it wasn't just those 2 guys, right? On the On the third one, the defensive tackle, who we'll talk about in a minute, was very late getting off the ball, stood straight up and got pushed back about 3 yards. That's where they ran. And that made the Mike's job a lot more difficult than it needed to be. On the second big run, you had a young edge who's going to be a fantastic football player and a longtime NFL player who came way too far upfield and was way too soft and led a giant running lane. He didn't do, in other words, what we've seen from Anthony Lucas in all 3 games. When Anthony Lucas has the edge, that dude has the edge, right? I mean, everybody saw him knock out that LSU pulling guard, but he's been doing that sort of thing consistently. Anthony Lucas will set the edge. Our young edge on that second touchdown run did not. And so it's not just, it's not just those 2 guys. I'm just saying, you describe that setup. Unblocked Mascarenas Arnold, Kamari Ramsey just has to run a good pursuit angle. I'm taking that any day of the week. And if you ask me before the Wisconsin game, the same question, I'll take it again because I trust those guys. They're good football players. But yeah, those 3 plays hurt. By the way,
And
go ahead.
you add in the holding calls that weren't called. I mean, they literally contributed after the 4th down stop that didn't get challenged. Next play, touchdown.
Yeah.
On the 4th and goal at the end of the game. I mean, it was egregious.
Look, I don't like whining about officiating, and I don't think the officials are the reason USC lost. But I will say this: they were terrible. The officials had a worse day than USC's tackles did. It was embarrassing how bad they were. Flat out embarrassing. And on the on the 4th and 3. By the way, Bear Alexander got blasted on that 3rd and 1 on that 3rd long run. He did, but on 4th and 3, that guy fought through about 3 guys and was right there ready to make a play. And the reason the play didn't get made is because they decided to wrap up Anthony Lucas and pull him off to the side. And it was about as obvious a non-call as you're ever going to see. That was shameful. Those officials should all be fired. Every single one of them. It looked like what we've been suffering with the Pac-10 or Pac-10 and then Pac-12 officials for years, but it may have even been a little bit worse. It was unbelievably bad. Not the reason we lost. USC lost the game, but those guys were awful.
I don't care how good of an offensive line you have. You do not run the ball 46 times in a game and not have 1 holding call. I mean, they throw the flag by accident just because they thought, maybe that was a hold. Now,
well, and two obvious missed face mask calls, for crying out loud, and an obvious targeting and cheap shot on Mekhi Lemon. I mean, really, it's not that hard, guys. These are easy calls to make. That was a terrible job. The Big Ten should come out and apologize for what we saw Saturday.
The national media.
USC lost the game, not the officials. They should apologize. It was shameful.
Cool.
Okay. How damaging is the loss, guys? In the grand scheme of things, with 10 being 13-9 and Texas, and 1 being just one of the games last year after we had already lost a bunch straight, how damaging is this loss? Mark, what do you think?
I don't think it's damaging at all. I really don't. I don't think this is going to affect the team long term. For me, they're going to use. They have no choice. They have to use this loss as a learning experience. What did we do wrong? What can we do better so this does not happen again? Again, we're all saying the same thing, maybe a little bit differently. I think they acquitted themselves well enough to win that game, despite all the mistakes they made. When you do that on the road, and again, we're talking about this team possibly being 2-1 at the end, we all would have been fine. But after they played the way they played, they won that first game against LSU. They come home, they shut out Utah State. Everyone's now, and I hate using the word, they're expecting 3-0. And when they were minutes away from pulling that out, you can't let that, all of a sudden overcome you and say, you know what, we're just going to fall back into our little shell and we'll be we'll just come out and we'll see what happens. This team has to take the approach of, you know what, we got screwed. We screwed ourselves. The officiating didn't help us out. We're going to take it out on the next opponent. I think this team, as long as they can stay healthy, and I don't know where we're at with that right now, I don't think it's going to have a long-term effect on this team. I think right now they're probably more pissed off than you and Eric and I are. I hope they are, because I'm pretty low.
Yeah, well, they should be more pissed off than us. Although, in fairness, we're often pissed off. Eric, what do you think? How damaging?
It would have been a better win than it is a bad loss. It was a real opportunity. I don't care what Michigan's quarterback situation was. I don't care what Texas did to Michigan. It would have been a really good win for USC, and it would have kind of opened eyes nationally and done a lot of, okay, maybe USC's for real. Now, there still would, I mean, if the offensive line played like that and they had won, there would have been a lot of, okay, well, we'll see, how real they are, and they've got some challenges still, like what we're talking about. But that would have been a statement win. So I don't see it as being, oh my gosh, they can't compete. They can't, that they're a disaster. It's like, had the LSU game gone the other way, let's say that goes to overtime at 2020 and LSU kicks a field goal, I still think there's conversation. Oh, they can play defense. Like that was what this was. They could play defense. They could play against these nationally ranked teams and go toe to toe with these programs. And that's what USC proved, that you don't have to go undefeated to make the Big Ten championship game. You don't have to go undefeated to make the playoff. I still don't think we're talking about how do we get a top 4 seed? We beat, one of the top 4 teams in the playoff. Like that still feels out there. And again, there's a bunch of season left, so maybe you can get to that point. But I think dropping from 11 to 13 is pretty indicative of how people view that. Like they went to Michigan, they played pretty well. They did not get pushed around all over the place, and now you go from here. Now, the Wisconsin game at home, right? That if they don't win that, then you start, okay, what's the matter? That's a big problem. But no, to show you can go up there and play in that stadium where they win all the time. I think what this does do is maybe LSU is again not as good as we thought they were coming in. Maybe Texas is better than what we thought about them.
No drop off when Mr. Manning came in.
Look, here's the thing. Texas is in a different situation than USC in that they do have a bunch of experienced offensive linemen. They still didn't do a ton offensively against Michigan. If you look at the numbers, their numbers were very modest. And that was with Michigan doing nothing offensively and turning the ball over a couple of times. That Michigan defense is for real. They're going to play well against everybody. They're not going to beat everybody because you can't beat everybody if you can't throw a forward pass these days. But they're going to beat a lot of people. I'm with you guys. Here's the problem. Being 2-1 at this stage with this team is not an issue. It's not. And I would have taken it. I mean, I think that was my position for the season is I think this is a 9-3, maybe a 10-2 team. You need to win one of those first 2. They did. And they acquitted themselves well in both. The problem is you lose all your margin from error. If you don't give that game away, you can trip up somewhere along the way. Now they can't. You can't trip up against Wisconsin or Nebraska or Maryland. You can't. You have to win all the games you're supposed to win, and then you need to find a way to win one of those other 2. I think that's where they are, and if they do that, it's a successful season. But there's no margin from error, and there would have been if they didn't give it away at the end. So that's unfortunate. But I'm not down on the future of the program after this 3-0 start. I mean, the hope was that they would completely turn around the defense very quickly, and they did. The defense made some mistakes, some costly mistakes. But that's a different defense than we've seen for many years, right? And I'll be honest, when watching USC win games 42-40 and lose games 45-42 over the last 2 years, what I kept thinking was, I'd be so much happier if we had a defense that would line up, know their assignments, was tough, and would hit people in the mouth. I'd be so much happier if we had that. Guess what, guys? We have that. They're not perfect, but they'll do that. They will line up and they will smack you in the mouth and they'll play hard. I'll take it. I like those guys. I like watching them. I enjoy watching them. And it's about time that we enjoyed watching a USC defense. It's been way, way, way too long. And I'm excited about the future because this is probably the least talented group. If this group stays together for a few years, it's probably the least talented group they're going to have. So I'm pretty excited about the future too. So it's not devastating, but it's pretty disappointing to give away a win at the Big House. Okay, let's close with this then. Let's talk about Wisconsin. Grinch makes his return to the Coliseum. That's pretty exciting. I mean, I was for so long I couldn't wait to get him out of there, and now he's coming back already. It's sort of strange. What do we make of the Badgers? Let's start with that, and then we'll close with some predictions. Who wants to start us off? Who wants to tell us what we got coming to town this Saturday?
I think we have Michigan light. I'm not sure who their starting quarterback is. I know it's not going to be Alex Van Dyke. He's out for the year. So again, another program that's coming in with, questionable passing game. CJ Williams is there as wide receiver. I know he's out there. I know they're going to play tough defense. I know they're going to try and run the ball. They're playing on the road in LA. Like I said, I anticipate USC being really ticked off at themselves. They know they gave the game away. And when you have to sit and stew like that for a week, usually you come out and you play better the following week. I think Wisconsin is coming into a hornet's nest right now. It almost would have been better for them had USC beat Michigan, thinking, all right, USC is going to maybe rest on their laurels, maybe be looking ahead to Penn State, whatever. I kind of feel bad for Wisconsin this week.
I don't feel bad for him, but I hope you're right. Eric, what do you think? What are the Badgers going to bring?
So yeah, Braden Locke is the quarterback. Tyler Van Dyke was the starter coming in, got hurt. You're gonna see a change there. It's a team that wants to run the ball and run the ball and run the ball. Their leading rusher runs for 4.3 yards per carry. So it's Big Ten, right? It's Big Ten football is what's coming. Leading receiver has 19 catches. The next guy has 8. You cover the one receiver, you stop the run, you feel pretty good about where you're gonna sit on defense. Defensively, what stood out to me, I'll tell you what stood out to me, is the Wisconsin defensive coordinator was talking on Monday, and the question came up, hey, you've got a guy on staff who's pretty familiar with, that USC offense. How much does that help when you got a guy like that? And he did say, well, when he's going against the offense, it's a lot of like install, just very basic stuff. They're going to have some wrinkles and all that. But then I perked up when he said, but when you have someone who's that familiar with them, you'd be crazy not to lean on him and get some thoughts and all that. And it was a little bit like the Jack Nicholson nodding smile. Yes, yes, yes. So if they're going to go there, great. Sounds great.
Yeah,
but no, it's a team. They're gonna come hit, right? They're gonna come hit. They're gonna come play physical. USC's got to stand up to it. I don't know if we're in a spot right now after that offensive line performance where you can say, "Oh, this thing's gonna be a cakewalk." Like Lincoln Riley's offense has scored fewer than 30 points in its last 4 regular season games against Power 4 opponents. Like this is Louisville. They did what they did in the bowl game, but when you go back to Oregon, UCLA to finish last year's regular season, and then LSU and Michigan, these are not pushover defenses that you're going against. But fewer than 30 points in all those games. So before we just start chalking up, hey, this is going to be a blowout. They got to put it together and get it done.
Yeah, I think USC is now a Big Ten football program, and I think they're going to play physical defensively, and I think they're going to churn out enough points. I don't know. I'm with you, Eric. After watching that offensive line performance, it's hard for me to sit back here and say, "Oh, we should be able to put up 40 on the Badgers." I don't know that. I don't know. Wisconsin's not great, right? They're a blue-collar team like Michigan, except unlike Michigan, they don't have first-round draft choices up front defensively. They also don't have a running quarterback. And while their quarterback can probably throw better than the Michigan guy, because I think I can, he's not a fantastic passer. And And it does change the running game when you have a lot of design quarterback runs, right? Because it gives you an extra blocker on every play. And Wisconsin won't have that benefit. But they're watching that film and they're saying, I think we can pressure this quarterback. And they may be right. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that yet, but they may be right. And if they do pressure Miller Moss, then things can get a lot more interesting than I'd like them to be. How interesting is it going to be? Mark, give me your prediction.
USC, you just want the score prediction? Is that what we're looking for right now?
Sure, let's do that.
Right. USC 38, Wisconsin 13. Again, I don't know enough about Wisconsin offense to say, that scares me. I know enough about USC's offensive line to say, all right, there's some concern there. I saw an adjustment in the second half. Hopefully that same adjustment can carry over into the next game. I'm not talking about personnel specifically, but they did some things as well, technically. The spacing was a little bit different. They were doing a little bit more to trying to help Miller Moss. That just needs to carry over to the following week. Again, I don't think Wisconsin has enough on offense, as little as I know about them, to beat Danton Lynn's defense. Michigan needed a pick six, some fortuitous calls, and 3 terrible execution plays by USC's defense to pull that game out. I think USC's going to be fine against Wisconsin, especially at home. And a sold-out Coliseum.
38-13, he says, Eric. What do you got?
I don't think it's going to be close, necessarily close. So I'm with you. I'm trying to land on either side of that 30, 28-31. I'm gonna say they get that field goal. I'm gonna say 31, and this like a young quarterback on the road after a bye without a ton. 31-10.
We're in the same.
We can't give up another defensive score, special team stuff. 31-10.
Don't get beat by CJ Williams deep. Don't let him have that moment.
Yeah, I think that's right. I was trying to decide between 31 and 34. I'm going to go 31-16. I have Wisconsin getting something cheap and late. I don't think the game's close. I think USC plays well this week at home, and I don't think Wisconsin's good enough to challenge this USC team when they're motivated. And I think they'll be motivated. So there it is. 3-0 for the Trojans, but that's going to be the case most weeks, I suspect. And as we know, that doesn't always turn out that way. Guys, anything we want to add before we close it out?
No, that's it. WeAreSC, all your Michigan review, all your Wisconsin preview.
There you go. Do we have some sort of specials, or is it just the usual great price? What is it?
Just the usual great price. No, if you didn't get in during Michigan week, the sale is done for now. So keep an eye out. Maybe more. Not right now.
I'm still told it's very cheap. So join us. We have fun on the message board. We have good content, I think. I like the content. I'd read what these guys write. You should too. All right, that's it. We're done. Keep your chins up, Trojans. We're going to be all right. Get back on track this week and set up a big game in a few weeks against Penn State, I think. So we'll see. Until then, fight on, everybody.